to the organizers and for YG for the invitation. Yeah, I'm Sean Luyk, Digital Curation Librarian, joining you from Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. So I'm really happy to be here to talk about Aviary, which is something, part of my job, a big part of my job that is really close to my heart, and something I think is not maybe common in Canada, more of a US-based service. So I'm happy to share that with this group. So I'll get my slides up and we will slideshow. So everyone should be able to see that, right? Just a thumbs up. Good. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm happy to kind of present about this. This is a session I offer on campus, often online on Zoom, to kind of introduce people to it. They've been pretty successful in the uptake. So a lot of this has been kind of presented and more kind of user directed. So if there's more technical or specific questions, there'll be lots of time at the end to answer. So first I'm going to go over what we call AV Digital Curation Research Support, sort of a service I kind of invented that grew out of a number of developments at the U of A library over the years. There'll be many examples of some of the features, and then I'll draw on some examples of collections as I go through that kind of illustrate some of the features and things that we're doing for curation of AV in Aviary. And then we should have lots of time at the end for Q&A. So first thing I'll start with is just about audiovisual media. So I'm really close to audiovisual media because of my previous role as a music librarian. We had large recording collections. So I was dealing with physical media and then kind of got involved in the archival question of archival collections, have a background in sound studies and music. So some of these aspects of audiovisual media come up in a technical sense in repositories, which is the space I work in. So they're just weird. Like there's just weird things about audiovisual media. If we're talking about digitized media, we have, tapes that tell you they are one thing and are another. We have weird problems that happen with them from a technical standpoint. They're difficult to preserve often, have lots of issues. Then when it comes to how people use them, there's sort of some weirdness in what we need to do to make those objects usable is quite different than what we typically are doing in, let's say, something like a DSpace or a Dataverse repository. Big point is they're durational, so you can magnify or sort of multiply, I should say, the labor involved in dealing with audiovisual media by the time it takes to listen or to watch an object. So things like metadata make it a lot harder. Metadata is a lot more labor intensive when it comes to media if you want to make them really meaningful objects for people to use and experience. Also just the size, they tend to be large files. We have different versions of them. So this whole duration piece means you need different repositories, in my opinion, that deal with the affordances of durational media and sort of present those in the best light. So, and we all know this as media consumers of streaming services, YouTube, all that kind of stuff, music services. There's features that are built into those that are designed for usability of those media in mind. So that's something I've learned throughout working in this space for about 10 years now, that a lot of the traditional platforms that we use for a lot of our other stuff don't always do justice to those durational aspects of media. So lots of great stuff in Aviary that does allow you to take advantage of that. Also, we've found there's often media that sort of accompanies things. So people are doing theses where they may have, for example, have recorded things that go with the thesis, or we may have a conference and we're recording a bunch of events and then a lot of publications come out of it. So it's sort of part of the ecosystem of scholarly and creative work that is happening. So it may sometimes be kind of like supplemental, and then sometimes is then therefore thought of as more ephemeral or more secondary to the scholarship, but I'd make an argument that it's the really important thing often that captures the moment and just how cool sound recordings and video recordings are for that aspect. Super complex from a rights management and technical perspective. So often dealing, with people's voices, people's intellectual property. If we're talking about indigenous knowledge, we're dealing with, capturing knowledge that is that may be transmitted orally, for example. So we're adding layers of complexity that may not be there with other kinds of media that we're preserving and curating. Lots of technical complexity, of course, with formats, codecs, the size of the files. If you're doing, digitization of film or something like that, those files are massive. There is the whole general digital preservation issue of integrity of files and things like that. So complex things to actually be dealing with from many angles. And not unique to media, but ongoing care and maintenance is a huge part of curation work. Media, there's sometimes maybe an added element to that we have to think about of maintenance in terms of file formats and even rights from a perspective of maintenance is kind of significant. So I always have this as an opening thing, like just this is kind of a weird space. Not a lot of libraries and archives are really doing it necessarily in the way that, in an access platform kind of way. So it kind of adds some angles that are kind of interesting and fun and challenging in my work. What the actual services are. So before I talk about the platform, what we're really doing, we're talking about is collection management. So access and preservation. So we're trying to ensure that access is good and suitable and appropriate and useful to people like libraries and archives do, but also dealing with media preservation, which has some of its inherent challenges. Also getting more into some SHRC and tri-agency buzzwords, knowledge mobilization. So we're increasingly seeing that Aviary is being used to support knowledge mobilization directly of funded research in really cool ways, which I'll talk about. So kind of that blend of it's archival platform, but also kind of an active platform of ongoing things. So a publishing platform in some ways too, which is quite cool. What the digital curation services are really assistance with metadata. So that's either us creating metadata or working with teams to teach them how to do that and then kind of mentor that process. Indexing of time-based media, so providing facility for adding timestamps and time-based sort of metadata to media objects is one of the things we can help with. Again, mentoring with people, but also taking some of that work on ourselves. Because media is often spoken or has linguistic material in it. We help people with transcripts. Sometimes that's AI assisted. Sometimes that's traditional hand created transcripts. But that's one of the things we can help with doing multilingual stuff. That kind of stuff too is quite useful for making the objects actually really searchable and usable. Because then, of course, you have the full contents of what is on the recordings. Also some level of annotation, so adding some metadata to those transcripts that digs even deeper and makes them really useful research objects. And yeah, lots of AI-assisted description has been built into the platform, but also things we can kind of help people navigate both from a technical perspective, but also from an ethical perspective of uses of AI, implications of that, privacy concerns, ethical concerns with using AI to assist in description and transcript creation. And importantly, of course, digital preservation. So we've made some big steps recently on this with Aviary that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, and that's really helped the service. We can tell people confidently that we're preserving the materials that are curated in Aviary. So if we move away from Aviary, then at some point, then we have a way to kind of rebuild the repository somewhere else. And of course, grant, project, program integration. So that comes in various ways on grants that I'm involved in. So you can see a reel-to-reel case of an item from the Spoken Web project, so a literary audio project that just wrapped up. It was a large partnership grant. Andrea's involved. Others at SFU and institutions across Canada have been involved in that. So that integration into those projects has been really useful of sort of being able to say we have something that can directly serve the goals of your grant, and then kind of that becomes a showpiece for the grant to get those materials out there, whether they be something like digitized recordings or if it's current materials, born digital materials being created. So this is Aviary. We call it AV Collections. So a little bit about Aviary before I go into the features and our background with it. So as early, I think it was 2016, we were using something called Avalon. So people may have heard of the Avalon media system. That is was part of this Hydra and then Samvera ecosystem. So an open source sort of media management repository. We aligned it pretty closely to our institutional repository. So we called it ERA A+V. And originally we thought the main use of it would be sort of teaching, like it's built as a tool for like course reserves essentially. That's how it was built out of Indiana University, out of a large music program at Indiana University Bloomington. And then what we found very quickly is what we needed was more a curation platform. So users would come to us with, I want to do this. I want to, for example, kind of index the recordings or add supplemental files, or can I build sort of like a landing page for my collection? And the answer would be pretty much at that time with Avalon, no. It's since that platform since developed, but we also moved away from open source software development at some point, and I had just heard about Aviary from a colleague at Yale University who had sort of been involved in developing it, and that's what we went for in 2022. So we've been on the Aviary platform since 2022, but been sort of in the AV repository space since about 2016. And on the Aviary side, so it is run by AV Preserve, who are effectively sort of like a consulting firm for audiovisual preservation, US-based company. It's software as a service, and they offer subscriptions for an access platform. And we've had a lot of success working with them and developing the platform to suit our needs and building collections. And it's really focused on that curation piece, which has been quite an advantage to us in how we're trying to build the service. So you can have a look at Aviary. There's lots of open content there to kind of browse and explore, some closed content. We have quite a number of content that's behind our SSO, so behind our campus login system, and then Aviary supports also user accounts just on its own. So there's ways to get in there without being a U of A user to restricted materials. But I'll go through some of the high level features and then and sort of how we operate it, and then kind of we'll have a good time for questions. So it's mainly, Aviary is mainly me. And then we do have in our digital repositories unit, we have two library technicians. This is not stable staffing at the moment. We've typically been staffing this with casual students, so like MLIS students, which has been great. And that's typically how we've been doing that. There's a lot of turnover, of course, in those positions because students graduate, but that's who the students who do most of the work on getting the collections into Aviary and creating metadata, curating them, that kind of stuff. We have a good metadata team and digital preservation team, and they, of course, provide sort of like internal support for the service in various ways. So metadata team does large oversight of the metadata in the platform. Digital preservation team is heavily involved in designing the workflows for preserving the content that goes in there. Also have a part-time developer who's in our library applications team who does some work with the API and kind of advises on different aspects. And then the great thing is if there's a grant that is really heavily utilizing Aviary, we can sometimes use that to build the service. And we've done this a few times. So that might be sort of on a labor side for curation of materials, or sometimes there has been actual cash that has been used to go towards the platform, which is quite nice. Current stats, so we're at about 5 terabytes of storage, and these are access copies, so quite a bit there. Just shows you there's like media takes up lots of space, so anyone in digital preservation gets nervous when they see these kinds of numbers. 6,700 hours of content, which I think is just phenomenal. It's a lot of stuff. So sort of the density of media content, this really speaks to just how much information is really there, even if there might be fewer files than, let's say, an institutional repository. There's lots of content. About 22,000 media files. We're getting good plays of content, but it's really an archival platform. So we don't get massive numbers. We're not getting sort of YouTube numbers, but that's not our goal. And we have 67 collections and counting, which is quite cool. Those range from collections maybe as small as like 1 or 2 items up to ones that are about 2,000 items. So like our largest collection is an archive of music recordings from the U of A since 1967 to the present. That was our first kind of main collection that kind of prompted us to build this. And archives at U of A are using Aviary quite extensively for providing access to media in the U of A archives collections. And that's been a recent change where we've been growing in this area. So it could balloon out because our archives has a huge media, many fall with lots of media in them, so probably not enough for us to ever afford to get through and deal with, but it's growing at kind of a good rate, which is nice. And the screenshot you see there, just to give you an example of something kind of interesting, is a collection of 360 videos of healing fountains in Brittany, France. So there's a researcher in art and design who effectively did like a research creation project to record these healing fountains. We have various versions of the files, lots of interesting metadata about like healing properties, bird species that are around the fountains. She's done ambisonic audio of the sound of the water, all this kind of interesting stuff. Has done VR work. So I always use this as an example of like a something that pushes our limits on what we're able to do and try to accommodate. So her and I have had a good collaboration on trying to accommodate like a really innovative, forward-thinking project in a repository and make that as the access platform. Kinds of content types, I've mentioned this briefly already. So a lot of music recordings, still are actively recording music on campus, and we get those from the sound engineers on campus, add those frequently. We support a lot of what we call alternative thesis formats at U of A, so people create media effectively as their thesis or as a supplement to their thesis. And we preserve a lot of those from art and design, music, drama, those kinds of things. Lots of archival and digitized collections, either from our archives, or researchers do this on their own. They fund their own digitization projects and then bring them to us. Lots of events, especially during the pandemic. We were growing a lot in sort of online conferences and trying to provide access points to those after the conferences were done, which is nice. Literary audio, we have some strengths in because of spoken web and a few other initiatives on campus. And so less I'd say probably in the natural sciences, but we do have some. So research data and field work from those areas. And you can see a still from, we have a whole collection of sponge reef footage, which is kind of interesting. So kind of an example of secondary usage. In those disciplines, like they're not necessarily using the video as their research data, but they're recording video while they're doing other things. So it's almost like a nice screensaver or like something for someone to look that's relaxing. So we get occasionally things like that, or like medical procedure things, which is kind of interesting. Oral histories, interviews, lots of podcasts. We've become a major podcast hosting platform in Aviary for campus and other community partners, which is quite nice. And licensed films. So anytime our collections are trying to buy films that don't exist on a commercial platform, we can buy those digital files and add them to Aviary, I think, which is really fantastic. So many purpose. So this is kind of wearing many hats, this repository. So it's kind of many purposes, and we're going to deal with these materials in different ways. The basic content model, so this is very typical to what you see in repositories. The highest level is effectively a collection. We kind of decide what a collection means. So that's a container for resources, and the resource is like the intellectual object, which may contain multiple media files. So you may have, I always use musical examples because that's my background. You have recordings with multiple tracks. So the resource would be the recording or the album or something, and then you might have multiple tracks for multiple media files for each track. Each media file can then be indexed, so time-stamped, have transcripts, and then we have supplemental files, so images and PDFs that are typically seen as supporting the recording. So lots of information that you can put with objects in Aviary, and there's also off to the side, we have the ability to make playlists as well. So pretty good features for allowing you to break things into collections of meaningful size that then can be useful for research projects to kind of have a landing page. At the collection level, so you can have a landing page with some basic look and feel, collection descriptions, hyperlinks to different places. Metadata is completely configurable, so you can change what fields appear at the collection level and kind of customize that to your needs. So it's very, very flexible. This was one of the issues we ran into with Avalon, is it was not really a flexible metadata model. You had metadata set at the repository level that would be consistently applied, which yes, we like as librarians and archivists, but on the other hand, researchers come with these really unique and kind of bespoke collections that they've already maybe created their own metadata, or have certain terms they want to use, labels for metadata that don't fit neatly into a standard. We're actually able to accommodate that, not without maintenance challenges, but still it has been appealing to people. So we create a collection for people, give them a look and feel, they can have contact information, rates information on there. So they can link to that on their, from their website, and then that becomes the home for their collection, which is quite a good feature. Descriptive metadata, I've touched on this a little bit before, so very configurable. So you can see some nice things in there, like we have relator terms for agents. So, with media, you have a lot of roles, of course, of different things that people did on the media. We can change those lists. We can add hyperlinks into the actual contents of the metadata. So that's quite a nice feature. And we can reorder in the interface the order of the fields, the prominence of them at the collection level. So a key kind of thing that'll come through on as I talk about Aviary is everything's configurable, very flexible, and it's very flexible at the collection level. So you can essentially almost have like collections that have entirely different metadata standards and ways that we present them, all living together in harmony in the repository, which is I think kind of unique based on some of the other platforms I've worked with. And then index is my favorite. We all know timestamps on YouTube and other places. This is the same thing. So you can timestamp at a very granular level. That can be typically it's like timestamps of index points, so like time markers, but you could do more subject-based indexing. So Aviary supports OHMs, so which is the oral history metadata synchronizer. So Aviary took that standard over and it lives in the platform now. So that doesn't exist outside of Aviary anymore. So you can have effectively segment metadata. So you can be cataloging a segment and like describe a segment, have subject terms that go with it and stuff like that, which we haven't got a lot of use of now. It's mostly use of yet, but it's mostly this kind of like time-based indexing. But this adds so much discoverability to these items in ways that traditional repository platforms just can't do because they can't do this time-based indexing or time-based metadata. Transcripts, so of course supports transcripts for accessibility and discoverability. So these can work as captions. We have different ways that we create transcripts. So sometimes people provide these to us. You can see a number of AI tools listed on there. So Aviary has integrations with these tools. So if you want to, you can, for a low fee, you can create a transcription job using one of these services. That is all seamless. It brings the transcript back into the platform. And then we'll do things like give users access to then correct those transcripts or give them the file to correct them and re-upload. Transcripts are a huge deal. Like it's very labor intensive and expensive. And then there's a whole question of AI. But you can see in here, this is actually an edited transcript from a spoken web recording. And what's great about this is very discoverable, fully edited, researched spellings and things like that fixed. It's very, very useful, this object. Like this object you can use that transcript for research, right? So that speaks to the potential of it. One of the issues is, of course, the labor. It's the time even to correct an AI transcript is like at least as long as the recording, likely more. So if you scale that up to 6,700 hours, it's kind of hard. So this is what all the Aviary users across the world are grappling with too, is trying to make it more discoverable. It's just a huge labor burden, but we're gonna try, especially for accessibility. Annotation. So this is you can then annotate a transcript, and what you're seeing on the screen is an example of a machine-assisted annotation. So Aviary also has integrations with Spacey, which is a natural language processing tool. And what this does is pulls out nouns effectively and then visualizes, whether it's a name or a time or a place. And then those can be edited and corrected, and each annotation can then be given a citation that appears in the interface. So making the object very, very useful and understandable. Supplemental files. So we can just add files that go with the media objects. So that's typically things like liner notes, maybe images and posters. If it's research, we even have sometimes resources that go with the media. So that's a nice feature. That was something we couldn't do in Avalon that comes up quite often. So we're preserving everything together. What we'll typically do with like archival media is we'll also have images of the containers because that adds context There's often metadata on those containers, and then if there's ever confusion about whether the media file goes with the thing we digitized, it can be kind of cleared up by those images. So that's another way we use them, and it adds also to the idea that you're dealing with material objects such as reel-to-reel recordings, and that the digital version of it kind of is a version of that. So we heavily use that in Aviary. Granular search, so basically everything in Aviary is searchable, and we have hit highlighting. So this is an example of that same transcript I showed of a Matt Cohen recording. So when you search in Aviary, it tells you where that appears. So if we have hits in the index, the description, the transcript, or the supplemental files, that will appear and it'll show you where it is. So very, very granular search that works quite well. I used to work in discovery, so I was really happy with how much attention they put to the search. You also have search within, so you can search within a resource only or within a collection or across the whole repository. So all the stuff we like in our fields of being able to kind of get to the granularity of something, which is so key in media, being able to get to the exact point that you want, that aids in research. Rights management and access control. So Aviary has what they call, it's like virtual reading room functionality. So similar to if you visit an archives and something's restricted or you have to visit the archives to access it, Aviary does this virtually. So if something is for ethical or copyright reasons restricted, we can make that restricted in Aviary and allow users to put in an access request. So in the access request, they can kind of say what they're trying to access it for. We have some categories of requests, and then it's very seamless in Aviary. We can provide access to them either time-based, so we can give them like time-limited access. We can allow them to download the file if that's suitable for it. And then, when their time expires, then the access is revoked. So that works well for materials that may be restricted for various reasons. And I'll get into that with an example of an Indigenous data sovereignty initiative. So this is CILR. So we worked with supporting Indigenous language revitalization, which is a unit on campus dedicated to Indigenous language preservation. And of course, this is Indigenous knowledge. It's meant for people of the community in accordance with OCAP. And we first used Aviary with the features that are available for rights and access. So kind of leverage that rights and access request feature to allow requests to be vetted. One of the issues is that's designed for an archives operating their own collection. So I would get the request and I would just forward it to CILR, which started to seem a little silly. So what we did is we worked with Aviary to develop some functionality in the platform. So what happens now is if someone makes a request for one of the items in the CILR collection, there's an email address attached to each resource of the data caretaker. So that may be the person whose knowledge it is, so the elder whose knowledge is in the recording. It may be a data caretaker that they've designated. And when that request is triggered, that sends an email to the approver, and then the approver doesn't even have to interact with Aviary at all. They just approve or deny that request from their email, and that gives access. So CILR was our first test of this, and it's been, you've seen it around at some other presentations, I'm sure, and it's made the rounds of some different library conferences and stuff like that. But we were able to really successfully develop sort of minimal viable OCAP basically in Aviary. So we've got the control piece pretty well down in Aviary. And this is great because, of course, Indigenous communities do a lot of storytelling is inherent to a lot of the knowledge transmission, at least in the communities of Treaty 6 that we're working with. And getting out to different communities, this language knowledge in a digital platform offers a lot of advantages for not needing to travel and stuff like that. So we're still working with CILR, adding more materials and using these features, and things are going well. There's still room to grow and improve, but it's, I think, a success story. And we're working with other groups connected to CILR, as well as the Aboriginal Teacher Education Program at U of A. We're going to be using Aviary as the access platform and using full restricted access to just the people who have a right to access it. So I could talk about that more in the question period, but there's lots that went into it outside of the technical piece that would be nice to touch on too. Very quickly, a playlist. This is our way we slice larger collections into smaller pieces. So that's, we all know this from YouTube and other places. It's a great way to kind of break things into smaller pieces. One of the limitations of Aviary is this collection model you can't really subdivide collections, which a lot of people want to do, especially if you're dealing with a larger collection of materials. So playlists are a nice way to do that. In the playlist, you can also share clips with people. So if you want to excerpt certain parts of different recordings, you can do that from the playlist feature and share that in different places. Sharing's very typical, so we can embed iframes in different places. We have a persistent identifier that people can link out to. It does not have DOIs in Aviary, unfortunately, but that's something we'd like to work with the vendor to develop. But a lot of people will embed things from Aviary in their research websites or other places, and that tends to work quite well for allowing them to have identity of their project around the media without it feeling like you're in a repository, which sometimes is not desired. We can do other interesting things like this resource public access URL. What that is effectively a backdoor to a media item, so like a private link that we can again add time limits on or the ability to download. So that's a quick way to get content to people without them having to become Aviary users and go through the platform. And we can share again particular parts of recordings in an iframe or in a link and stuff like that, which is quite nice. We do have analytics and some users ask for them. So we have kind of like typical to what a Google Analytics would offer in the platform. We can download and export as a CSV to people. So that's particularly podcasts. They're always asking for that. So that's also useful as a collection manager to know what's going on and who's watching your repository and using things, what the most popular items are and search terms are. So analytics are quite strong in Aviary, and we kind of rely on them for case making of having the platform as well internally. Large growth service lately has been podcast hosting and archiving. So you can generate RSS feeds from Aviary that then get put right into podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we developed a whole service around it. This was inspired by University of Minnesota Archives does this. And I was at, I think it was an ARL or ACRL webinar and kind of got the idea to do this at U of A. So we have a whole intake process where users create the metadata. We work with them to publish things according to their release schedule and provide analytics to them to use for sort of their metrics. And this has been a growth area. We have quite a few podcasts. Just show a few examples here. Some examples of things like Accessing Home is a student thesis project. They did a podcast as part of their thesis about houselessness in Edmonton. So a very cool project. Beyond the Page is a recent one. That's an OJS journal that also produces podcasts. So we're hosting that. The one with the two students on the leaves is called Happiness Reflected. So that's out of the Dean of Students here. A project about sort of mental health and wellness on campus. SSH the podcast is a big social science humanities podcast, interview podcast. So all kinds of them, and these are a mix of current podcasts that people are actively publishing, but also archival podcasts. We've also developed an archiving process for like dead podcasts. There's a lot of podcasts out there that are kind of sitting somewhere, and we have some methods we developed for pulling those down, generating metadata, and archiving them. So I'm working with community partners and other researchers because people tend to run out of steam with podcasting, and they do maybe a couple seasons and then get tired. So that's been a great example of something for knowledge mobilization that we can offer. And people are writing it into their grants now. So if they're going to add podcasts as part of their knowledge mobilization, they'll write Aviary into it. And I'll help them with the language on their grant to talk about how they can do that and what we can support. So very nice to be able to offer that to people. And very briefly, and I'll wrap up, is preservation. So there's lots to be said about this, but essentially we also, like we did with Siller for the Indigenous data sovereignty features, we worked with the vendor to develop some preservation features in the platform. So the first was media info technical metadata. So media info is a commonly used tool for getting at the technical metadata of media files to, know things like the resolution, the codecs used, how it was recorded, so the platform it was recorded on, stuff like that. So all that preservation metadata. We get media info, technical metadata right in the platform, which is nice. So this is more like for debugging problems with files, typically. And then we can go and transcode the file again and fix it. Uh, Improvements to the API to support preservation. So the API was quite rudimentary. We worked with the vendor to improve how robust the API was, so we can actually get everything down from the platform that we need. We also display fixity information in the platform, and can pull that from the API as well, so we can compare if files have changed. So good file integrity, digital preservation stuff. And then again, to support all this, an audit log. So we have all the actions that happen on an object are logged. And using the API, then we can know when a change has been made, incremental changes that can be made, and then we can download those into preservation storage. So we just finished preservation of a large backlog. So we had about 4 years of content in Aviary that was not preserved outside of the platform, which was making everyone very nervous, understandably. Thanks to our digital preservation team and library applications team, they developed a number of scripts and then worked with the vendor to improve the API and have effectively like lightweight apes, archival information packages that live in OLRC. And then we're working on the incremental piece. So like checking the platform periodically to look for changes, then pull those down and append those to existing containers. Here's some examples of this lovely technical metadata. So you have your media info metadata that displays in there and is accessible through the API. And then we have our fixity stuff as well. So this is just a little bit of like reassurance within the interface, even though we're preserving the true preservation at work is happening outside of the platform. It's really a curation platform, but we're kind of seeing these as feeding into one another. So we're actively trying to curate objects and add value to them as we go, which is maybe a little different than the typical preservation approach, but there's lots of great cases to be made for that of researchers adding value to their collections at a later date, and that kind of takes time. So we rarely come into a case where we've got a collection, everything's done, and we preserve it and then make it accessible. We're kind of doing the opposite. So in order to achieve that, we had to change some of our features in Aviary to allow us to do that. So that is like a very whirlwind tour of Aviary. Oh yeah, and here's our activity log. Just logs who made the change, what the change was, and what the assets were that were changed. But yeah, very quick overview of Aviary. There's lots to be said about it, and I don't know if I went over time or not, but I'm happy to answer questions for as long as I'm able. And my email's there too.